Hello, my name is Ben, he, him. I'm coming to you from the unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, also known as Vancouver. On behalf of our group, BC Nurses United for Social Justice, I want to welcome you to our first event in our webinar series, An Evening with Dr. Gabor Maté, to discuss the devastating violence in Gaza and how it impacts our healthcare worker colleagues and the Palestinian people. We'll begin tonight with a welcoming from Elder Dr. Roberta Price, followed by a discussion with Dr. Maté. We'll then be providing some info on the resolutions we submitted for our union's convention coming up in May, and then a short Q&A. For accessibility, we'd like to point out the closed caption feature you can use on Zoom by clicking the CC icon on the toolbar, and we're hoping to have a recording of the event available in the coming weeks. Thank you for being here, and I'll now hand it over to Coast Salish matriarch, Elder Dr. Roberta Price, to open our event in a good way.
OCM, thanks so much, Ben. Aichka CM Siaya, greetings and welcome everyone. As Coast Salish matriarch and elder, I wish to give a very warm thank you to all my relatives on the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh for welcoming me to live in the unceded lands of my relatives Musqueam here in Richmond, going on 44 years now. As Coast Salish matriarch and elder, I wish to give each and every one a very warm welcome who live, work, and play, teach and learn, give and receive service, celebrate this event on our unceded, ancestral, and occupied lands of my relatives, Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh. Always holding my hands up in honor and thanks to my beautiful mentor teaching elders, Elder Vince Stogan from Musqueam, Elder Bob George from Tsleil-Waututh, to always follow in their mentoring footsteps, their mentoring teachings, to always share a blessing and a prayer whenever we come together. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the teachings of our ancestors. Haichka Osiam. We give you many, many thanks, Creator, for bringing us all together in this very wide virtual circle in such a warm and respectful way. We ask, Creator, that you bless the ones who are away due to illness or other obligations. Bless the ones yet to join us. Help them to join safely. We call upon you, Creator, to bring your blessings down upon our minds, our hearts, our bodies, our spirits. So when we think our thoughts, they are good, positive, and respectful. When we speak our words, they are good, positive, and respectful. And we call upon you, Creator, to bless the people who prepare the food and drink. Bless the food and drink we put in to nourish our bodies on our journeys to wellness and strength. We give you kind thanks each and every day, Creator, for the special blessings and protection you bring down upon all the beautiful people who are working so very hard in so many ways, in so many places, during this pandemic, for all illnesses, for the safe delivery of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and especially for the ongoing opioid crisis. Continue to bless and protect them and their families, Creator. And we kindly and respectfully ask you, Creator, to bring very special blessings of protection and healing down upon all our relatives right across Turtle Island, who have reopened wounds and are grieving all over again over the ongoing daily. Bless and protect all of our relatives into health and healing. And we kindly and respectfully ask you, Creator, to bring very special blessings of protection and healing down upon our beautiful, beautiful Mother Earth. All of the wounds put upon Mother Earth, all of the effects of those wounds put upon Mother Earth that have brought us the extreme rain, wind, wildfires, snowstorms, hurricanes, earthquakes that have impacted families and communities around the globe. Bless the families and communities into health and healing. Bless and protect our beautiful Mother Earth into health and healing. And we kindly and respectfully ask you, Creator, to bring very, very special blessings of protection and healing down upon all our beautiful families and communities experiencing the extreme oppression over in the Ukraine, in Sudan, Afghanistan, in the Middle East of late, especially, Creator, Bless and protect all the beautiful families and communities in the health and community. And we kindly and respectfully ask you, Creator, to wrap each and every one of us here and all of our loved ones in the warmest blanket of protection as we all continue on this part of the journey of our lives. Help us each to keep safe in our travels both near and far, Creator. And we always give you many, many thanks, Creator, as we ask you to bring all of your blessings down upon all the ones that are hurting, all the ones that are grieving, all the ones that are hungry, all the ones without homes, and especially, Creator, all the ones that are hurting, all the ones that are grieving. Haichka, Haichka Ocean, Ocean. Thank you so much, everyone. I pass it back to the circle now. Ocean, Ocean.
Thank you, Elder Dr. Roberta Price. So for a bit of background, the BC Nurses United for Social Justice group, it's a grassroots group of BC Nurses Union members who believe healthcare workers should play a pivotal role in decolonization and the promotion of social justice from Canada to Palestine. At a time when starvation has begun and famine appears imminent in northern Gaza due to Israeli government policy, loss of civilian life is at levels unseen since World War II, and our healthcare colleagues are being killed at an unprecedented rate by the Israeli military. We believe it is our duty as nurses to educate ourselves, fellow members, and others on what is happening in Gaza as a result of 7 decades of settler colonialism. I'll now hand it over to Sandra to introduce our guest speaker.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra Ramos. My pronouns are she, her. I am speaking to you from the traditional, stolen, and occupied territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. I am a registered nurse of 18 years, and it is my great honor to introduce our speaker for tonight. Gabor Maté is a retired physician who, after 20 years of family practice and palliative care experience, worked for over a decade in Vancouver's downtown east side with patients challenged by drug addiction and mental illness. The best-selling author of 5 books published in nearly 40 languages, including the award-winning In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction. Gabor is an internationally renowned speaker who is highly sought after for his expertise with addiction, trauma, childhood development, and the relationship of stress and illness. For his groundbreaking medical work and writing, he has been awarded the Order of Canada, which is his country's highest civilian distinction, and the Civic Merit Award from his hometown, Vancouver, British Columbia. His most recent book, The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture, is a New York Times and international bestseller. Dr. Maté, I read your book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts early in my nursing career, and it left a profound impact as it resonated so deeply. During a time when the British Columbia healthcare system was just starting to address the interconnectedness of addiction, trauma, and mental illness, your book instilled hope for the future of this profession. On behalf of what I imagine are many nurses across British Columbia, thank you for your leadership, your teachings, and your advocacy. I would like to let everyone know that as you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function. Please welcome Dr. Gabor Maté.
Well, thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Elder, for introducing everything. It's very appropriate that a group of nurses should be concerned with social justice because although it forms little part of our medical education, social factors have everything to do with health. if we just begin with Canada, and you mentioned I'm the recipient of the Order of Canada, something that's difficult to be proud of these days because our government, to say the least, has been disgraceful in its approach to what's happening in Gaza. But Justin Trudeau, our current prime minister, said something very revealing. He said that Canada supports Israel because we share the same values. And you know what? He was absolutely right. Both countries were founded on the robbery of Indigenous lands, and both countries were founded on the massacres of Indigenous people, and both countries were founded on the continued dispossession and exploitation of Indigenous people, which in both countries is continuing. Although in Israel, Palestine, it's continuing at a much faster and much more dramatic and much more dire rate. So our prime minister was very accurate in his assessment that we share the same values. I just wouldn't be so proud about it the way he seems to be. Now, when it comes to mentioning social determinants of health and social justice, let's just look at Canada. In Canada, if you look at who's in jail in this country, 50% of the women in jail and prisons in our country are Indigenous. 50%. They make up 5 or 6% of the Canadian population. 30% of the men in jail are Indigenous. When I worked in the downtown east side, 30 to 40% of the clients I had were Indigenous, suffering from addictions, HIV, and everything else. If you look at health statistics, an Indigenous woman in this country has 6 times the rate of rheumatoid arthritis than of a non-Indigenous, non-female person. This is in a population that never used to know autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis. So without going into the science of it, it's just not the time to talk about that, but to correlate social justice with health and inequality and racism with ill health is only scientifically accurate. And it's not just a psychological problem, it's a physiological problem. So the more episodes of racism, for example, a Black woman experiences in the States, the greater her risk for asthma, because racism causes inflammation in the body. So that's just the general background. Now, as to my own relationship to the Gaza-Palestine-Israel issue, I'm Jewish, as many of you probably know. I was an infant survivor of the Holocaust. I mean, I nearly died in my first year of life in Budapest under Nazi occupation. My family was deeply traumatized by it. My grandparents perished in Auschwitz. But for very close circumstances, so did I almost and my mother. In my teenage years here in Canada, I became a fervent Zionist. I really believed in the dream of the Jewish homeland as a antidote and as a redemption for the Jewish people against the suffering, racism, and horrors they'd suffered in Europe. And then, so these days it's rather funny when people tell me I don't know the history, I have a one-sided view. No, I don't. I know that side. I could spot it in my sleep. But at some point, if your eyes are opened, and if you're fortunate enough, you get disillusioned. And we usually talk about disillusionment as sort of a bad thing. Oh no, I got disillusioned. Well, let me ask you this question. Would you rather be illusioned or disillusioned? Would you rather believe in fantasies and fairy tales and a false reality, or would you rather know the truth? Not a bad thing to be disillusioned. And without going into the details of my disillusionment, I found out that this beautiful dream of the Jewish resurgence in our ancient homeland came at the cost of imposing a nightmare on the Palestinian indigenous population. And the Zionist argument that we Jews are indigenous is complete nonsense. First of all, nobody can claim indigenous status after 2,000 years. Number one. Number two, most Jews in the world became Jews because of conversion to Judaism. They never originated in Palestine. Number three, the Jews that did stay in Palestine in Roman times, many of them later converted to Christianity and then finally Islam. So some of the descendants of ancient Jews are actually amongst the Palestinian population of that land today. So let's just forget about this business of indigenous rights. The reality was that the Jews suffered horribly in Eastern Europe, even before the Holocaust, and the movement arose that they should establish their own country and in this ancient homeland, which theoretically made perfect sense. However, there was a reality. There was a Zionist slogan that said, a land without a people for a people without a land. There was no land without a people. That country had an indigenous population who loved the land, who loved the earth, who loved the plants, who loved the olive trees, who loved the rivers and the lakes, the history, their culture, their tradition. And as the Zionist leaders acknowledged, I'm talking 100 years ago, 120 years ago, that no people voluntarily give up their land. And so without going into all the history of agreements and UN resolutions and this and that, it was very simple. How do you create the land for a people where there's already an indigenous population? By suppressing, denying the rights of, ultimately expelling, and then often massacring the local population. So the 1948 Nakba, the catastrophe, as the Palestinians call it, was characterized by, and I'm not quoting Palestinians here, I'm quoting Israeli historians who have researched it and have documented it beyond a shadow of a doubt, that expulsion in 1948 was accompanied, or what can I say, aided by large-scale massacres of Palestinians and rapes of Palestinian women, documented not by the Palestinians, well, by them too, but also by Jewish Israeli historians. And if it had ended in 1948, that might have been at least internationally acceptable, but it never did. The expulsions continued in 1949, in 1950, again in 1956, again in 1967. And on the population that remained in the land, the Palestinians that stayed within Israel proper they lived under military rule for 18 years until 1966, horrible circumstances. Now they live like second-class citizens in a country where they told that this land is explicitly Jewish. So you have no national rights here. You have the right to be a citizen. And you're entitled to second-tier services and all kinds of discrimination and racism and some political rights. You can vote and you can run for elections and all that. That's true. But don't aspire to be a full national citizen of that land, because you're not Jewish. And in the passes that people carry, their religion, the religious origin is stamped. Imagine if in Canada you had to carry around the pass saying, I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim. How would we feel about that? That's the Palestinians inside Israel. Then there's the Palestinians inside the occupied territories in the West Bank and Gaza, who have no rights whatsoever, and whose lands have been and continue to be taken over. And I've visited that land 3 times now. Last time I was there was 2 years ago, working with Palestinian women tortured in Israeli jails, which happens all the time. It's beyond horrible to see. Now, Gaza, the Gaza Strip, there's no such thing as the Gaza Strip. That's an Israeli creation. Israel created a ghetto for the Palestinians. They called it the Gaza Strip. But Gaza is a part of Palestine, always has been. that population has been subjected now to 15 years of severe blockade, deprivation of goods, food, medical equipment, and periodic bombings, which kill thousands of people, including hundreds and hundreds of children, repeatedly. This has happened 4 or 5 times. So the current bombing campaign that has claimed over 30,000 lives now, close to half of them children, there's nothing new about it. What's new about it is the scale of it, which is beyond anything that anybody could have imagined. And I can tell you, it's the darkest, worst thing I've seen in my whole life, because it's happening in front of our eyes and the world is standing by. And the countries that were either colonial countries like Holland and Germany and Britain and France, and the countries that themselves were founded on colonialism, like Canada, the US, and Australia, they're all standing by, applauding the thing, justifying it, occasionally making mealy-mouthed criticisms, but not lifting a finger to stop any of it. And that's what's going on. As far as the impact on the Palestinians, well, first of all, if you look at this organization, Hamas didn't exist 40 years ago. It was a response to a brutal occupation. If you look at who the founders of Hamas was, you know who they were? They were children whose parents had been massacred by the Israelis. You can look that up historically. There was a massacre in Gaza at Khan Yunis in 1956, in 1953 at Kfar Qasim. I mean, there were at Rafah. There's nothing new about the massacres. In 2005, before Hamas became the dominant political force in Gaza, which, by the way, it became as a result of what the Jimmy Carter Foundation called the freest election ever held in the Arab world. But before Hamas came to power, there was a psychiatric study of the traumatic impact of war on children and people around the world. It was the worst in Palestine. This is 2005. PTSD amongst children, anxiety, depression, bedwetting, aggressive behavior, disobedience of parents. When you think of the young militants who streamed into Israel on October the 7th, who do you think they were? They were those children growing up who'd been traumatized. And as to what's going on right now, the Israelis have, with quite deliberate intention, destroyed the healthcare system there. They've destroyed the hospitals. They've targeted doctors. They've targeted academics. They've turned the hospitals into charnel houses. The first and for a long time only child psychiatrist in Gaza, amongst all that terror, all those years, he's now desperately trying to leave Gaza because he's got 6 children and he just doesn't know what to do anymore. So those that can are trying to leave. Now, Canada, which magnanimously accepted 30,000 Hungarian refugees in 1957, I was one of them, and I say that gratefully, and which accepted, I don't know, 12 to 20,000 or more Ukrainian refugees within a very few months, has not accepted a single Palestinian. And the rules for Palestinians are so onerous, they have to be outside Palestine first. So while they're being bombed, they can't leave, according to Canadian rules. So the healthcare system has been largely destroyed. As you know, doctors are having to operate without anesthetic. Children are having their shattered limbs amputated without anesthetic. Can you imagine a 10-year-old having their leg sawed through without anesthetic? And our newspapers and our politicians say it's all too bad, it's necessary. Too bad that we have to do this. Too bad the Israelis have to do this, but they're forced into it. No, they weren't. And history did not begin on October the 7th. Whatever atrocities occurred on October the 7th, which they did, that was not the beginning. Gaza was like a boil waiting to burst, like an explosion waiting to happen, like a pressure cooker waiting to blow. Anybody could have known that. And it was predicted. So 18,000 children, as of a month ago, had been orphaned. Now, when Palestinian families are killed, it's not like mother and father are killed. They all live together. They live in multi-generational families. So when a family is killed, 100 people are killed. And the child is left orphaned without uncles and aunts and grandparents and cousins. That's what it means to be an orphan in Gaza. I don't have to be a prophet to foresee the traumatization of that population and just the horrible effects it's going to have. When I was in the West Bank 2 years ago, a healthcare worker told me once, whose neck had been broken by an Israeli soldier, by the way, and she was fixed by an Israeli surgeon. And she said, there's no post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. And I saw that. So we don't have to be prophets to foresee what's going to happen there. Meanwhile, on the West Bank, children are being killed. Last week, a 12-year-old kid was shot to death. He had a firecracker in his hand. The Israeli sniper who shot him was 100 meters away and no danger whatsoever, even if the kid had hostile intent. Nobody's going to be investigated. Nobody's going to be punished. The newspapers barely mentioned it. And in Canada, no newspaper mentioned it. The death of a Palestinian child is not news. So what's happened there is a culmination of beyond awful Jewish trauma, of a colonial enterprise, which was supported by the great powers, first by Britain and now by the United States, which continue to support it, which is part of the problem that we face in Canada, is that the Palestinian narrative is hardly ever told. I mean, people know nothing about it. That's not news either, because 4 years ago, there was a poll in Canada, and 70% of Canadians said they knew nothing or little about the residential schools. I mean, we don't tell the truth about our own history. Why would we tell the truth about Palestinian history? Now, the awareness of the Indigenous cavalry in this country is changing in this country, but it took a long time. But even now, it's woefully inadequate. There was a study done of newspaper opinion pages in the Washington Post and the New York Times between 2000 and 2009. Of all the opinion pieces to do with Palestinians, 1% had been written by Palestinians. The rest had been written by non-Palestinians, and although the study didn't say so, when I look at those newspapers, I would say the vast majority were written by Jewish people. Which then brings me to the present problem here in Canada. which is that, and it's one of the reasons that not the only reason, but one of the reasons I speak out as loudly and as often as I can, because I want to get rid of this calumny, is that to criticize Israel is anti-Semitic. And you're going to be facing that all the time. As soon as you open your mouth and you think maybe it's not right to kill 13,000 Palestinian children, maybe it's not okay to starve kids on purpose, maybe it's not okay to deny them medical supplies so that they have to have their arms amputated without anesthetic, maybe that's not right, you're going to be called an anti-Semite. Don't fall for it. Don't let them intimidate you. You're no more anti-Semite for criticizing the actions of a colonial settler state than you are an anti-Canadian for pointing out the injustice that has been perpetrated and continues to be on our Indigenous people. So I'd say the touchstone for social justice today in the world on the international level is Palestine. Don't allow yourself to be silenced. But that's happening all the time. No, I'm in a kind of fortunate position because they can't fire me because I don't have a job, you know. I'm independent that way. But I did have a major university cancel a speaking engagement. Nothing to do with Palestine. I wasn't going to say a word about Palestine. It was arranged a year before. It was going to be on health and trauma and so on, the usual subject that I address. But some donors, somebody or some faculty complained because this guy is, you know, controversial. You better not have him talk on anything. So they canceled me. One of my sons was going to speak at Concordia University, where he's a graduate. University said it's a security risk. They canceled him. Now he spoke off campus. Canadian healthcare workers have been threatened for speaking out. Maybe some of you have been, or you've been accused. And somebody like British Columbia's former Minister of Higher Education, when she said that Palestine was just a crappy piece of land before the coming of the Jews, which was it wasn't even a lie, because she believed it. It was ignorant and racist to the extreme. Imagine if somebody said that about Canada, that before the coming of the Caucasians from Europe, Canada was just a crappy piece of land. What would be the outrage? And it took days of outrage for that person to be divested of her ministry, and then she left the cabinet. And now she's complaining about anti-Semitism. The good news is that much of the pro-Palestinian protest is supported by Jews. It's a minority, but it's a much larger minority than it used to be. So don't let yourself be discouraged. I'll stop here. I just salute your work in general, and I'll salute your interest in this subject in particular. And I'll proceed however you want to proceed. If you want to take questions, I'll take questions. If you want to introduce something else, just go ahead.
Thank you so much, Gabor. We're going to be taking questions in the Q&A. So for folks who are on the call today, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in there. I do believe that some of our panelists or some of our other hosts here have our own questions for you. So I'll let Sandra start us off with that.
Dr. Maté, thank you for mentioning that this didn't begin on October 7th. I think we've always understood that there's challenges in the healthcare system in Gaza prior to October 7th. But I was wondering if you could maybe share more of your thoughts on what the realities are of providing healthcare in Gaza right now. You spoke a little bit about that. Just wondering if you can expand on it a bit more, please.
Well, the reality is that, as was mentioned in the introduction, a lot of the healthcare personnel have been killed. The reality is that every single hospital in many hospitals have been destroyed. They're non-functional. And even the ones that are still standing are functioning at like a 10% or 15% capacity because of the deprivation of medicines and equipment. Neonates have died and rotted to death in their cribs for lack of electricity. People are starving. And they're having infectious diseases because of hunger and crowding. The doctors are overwhelmed, those that are still working. They're stressed beyond the limit. What to say? You know, it's like, and the supply of medical goods. You know what was stopped last week by the Israelis? They wouldn't let in surgical scissors. Surgical scissors, big weapon of war. You must keep it out. Mustn't give them weapons. We can drop 2,000 bombs on them, 2,000-pound bombs on them, but they mustn't even have a surgical scissor. But what can you imagine under those circumstances? Now, if you want to know more about it, doctors who have worked there and have been there recently have been interviewed on the program Democracy Now! So just Google democracynow.org and look at their past 2 weeks. And there's been several doctors interviewed who've been there recently and can talk very eloquently and in tragic detail about what they witnessed.
Thank you so much. I think from our representation here, it's pretty evident that BC nurses are eager to do something and not just stand by, as you've been saying. And so my question is, how do we action some of these teachings that you bring and this information you bring forward, and how do we embody this professionally or in our personal lives, specifically to alleviate the human suffering in Gaza?
Well, first of all, I don't know how long your organization has existed, but surely you know something about advocacy. And the BCNU is a pretty conservative institution as far as I can tell. But to the extent that you have the capacity, please do advocacy within the BCNU, as you probably have been, for social justice in general. And as I said, on an international level, Palestine is not the only tragedy going on right now. I mean, thanks to the globalized imperial system, there are plenty of tragedies all over the world, but it's the salient one right now. So do some advocacy there and don't allow yourself to be intimidated. Number one, that's in general. Number two, I think you should take your cues from Palestinians, not from me. I think you need to contact Palestinian organizations and ask them what kind of support would they most welcome and could they most use. Now, right now, until this war and this siege is going on, I don't even know if there's anything practically you can do except raise funds, which itself is a good thing to do. Those of you that are in the Vancouver area, and on this Saturday night, I'll be giving a talk at somewhere in Guildford or Surrey or something as a fundraiser. You can come and donate, and or you can do your own fundraising and donate to the UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Relief and Assistance Organization. My God, which Canada defunded for a while, shamelessly, based on a bunch of Israeli lies, based on non-documentation, based on the charge that out of 13,000 UNRWA employees, and that's the major organization providing food and medical support and just humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. And the Israeli charge was that we found out that 13 of them had been members of Hamas. My God. So 0.1%. Well, of course, you're going to find Hamas. Hamas is not just a terrorist organization, it's also a government that provides still services. Of course, some of them are going to be members of UNRWA, but 1%, so what? And how did Israelis get this information? By the interrogation of Palestinian prisoners. You know what that means? Torture, waterboarding, that's what it means. And based on that information, Canada cut off the support for UNRWA. Now, Canada has restored it. The US has not. So support the UNRWA, but get in touch with Palestinian sister organizations and find out what is it that they could use. When this is over, some of you may wish to go there and provide services. Those of you that can afford the time and the energy.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Simone.
Hello, Dr. Maté. Thank you so much for talking to us today. Probably you can tell I'm Palestinian. And my question is how to navigate the feeling of injustice, fear, and helplessness when we are working for those who claim to be apolitical when they are the most political and claim to promote equality, equity, and advocacy. There is another part to my question, if I may.
Yeah, but before you do, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to explain a bit more what you mean by your first question.
Yes.
So can you tell me a bit more? What do you mean?
So as Palestinian in the current situation, well, let's start from the beginning. When you come to Canada as a woman of color, with so much difference from, the Canadian, there are so much injustice happening. So you kind of try to tread the water. And it's a very hard trip and uphill battle to be able to be recognized for the work you do, not for your skin color or your accent or where you're coming from.
Yeah.
With the events, and we all know it's not the start of it, October 7, it became even harder to speak up. And the way that people look at you, there is fear, there is feeling of injustice and helplessness.
Okay, well, look, I shared that feeling of injustice. I mean, since October the 7th, I wake up with Gaza on my mind and I go to sleep with Gaza on my mind. It's the heaviest time I've lived through, as I said earlier. And I'm not alone in that feeling. And there's a lot of people in the world who feel the same way. So first of all, know that you're not alone, okay? Secondly, the helplessness. I share it. I mean, I really do. Like I have a platform. My talks on YouTube have been seen by hundreds of thousands of people on this subject, but that hasn't saved a single Palestinian life. It hasn't saved the little finger of one little Palestinian baby. So that sense of helplessness, or even futility, I understand that one too. And the question is, what are we to do with it? Will we let that sense of helplessness and futility stop us? And in terms of how people look at you, well, I got news for you. Let them look at you. Let them look at you. It's their problem. You don't live in their minds. You live in reality. Let them look at you any way they want, or any way they're moved to. No, look, it's a lot easier for me because A, I'm male, B, I pass for white. Why I pass for white, I have no idea, but that's another issue. I mean, white, I'll show you white, okay? This is white. How am I white? I don't know, it's stupid. But anyway, I passed for white. But you know, I get called names: self-hating Jew, supporter of terrorism, worse than a Nazi. Am I going to let that bother me? I mean, if other people are insane, why should that be my problem? And I'm telling you, there's a group mass psychosis around this issue, so that good people who ordinarily are full of compassion and sense of justice and well-meaning, on this issue, they go psychotic, in the sense that they're totally out of touch with reality. And they can look at the deaths of thousands of children and somehow justify it. Don't make it your problem. So if you're facing discrimination specifically, or specific measures directed at you, you need to ask for help from people that will support you. But in terms of your internal process, don't let it stop you. Don't take it on. It doesn't matter how they look at you. Let them look any way they want. They have a problem. You don't. That's the only thing I can tell you.
Thank you.
Now you had a second question?
You kind of covered it.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a couple questions in our Q&A that have been given by the audience. One question is sort of related to what you were just speaking about, was considering the experience of Jewish people in World War II, how is it that more Jewish folk aren't up in arms against the Israeli government actions against the Palestinian people?
Well, trauma doesn't automatically lead you to compassion. It can also make you very defensive and very fearful. And trauma that's not healed, trauma that's healed and worked through, can make you more compassionate, more aware. But trauma that's not healed can make you more defensive. And when you're in defensive mode, the parts of your brain that mediate compassion and insight and fellow feeling are shut down, and you're in the back end of your brain, which is purely defensive, full of fear and aggression. And specifically, the generation of children of survivors are full of fear. Number one. Number two, they don't know the history. They've never read those Israeli historians who have uncovered the truth. And because of the imperial alliance with Israel, the media here don't tell them the truth. So A, if you're full of fear, and B, if you don't know the truth, when October the 7th happens, you know what it looks like? It looks like just another anti-Jewish massacre. Now, the truth is, the people that were killed in Israel on October the 7th, whatever happened to them, did not die because they were Jews. They died because they were occupiers on the land. In the minds of the Palestinians, a lot of the Palestinians, by the way, you should know, a lot of the Gazan, you know where they came from? They came from villages that were bulldozed into the ground where the kibbutzim were that those people attacked on October the 7th. But if you don't know that, now if they had been Germans, if they had been elephants, if they had been dinosaurs, if they'd been French, they would have been the targets of that attack on October the 7th. They happened to be Jewish Israelis, mostly, not purely, but mostly. But they weren't killed because they were Jews. But if you're full of fear based on the collective trauma of your people, and if you've never been told the truth, in fact, if you've been propagandized into the opposite of truth, then all you're going to see is a major anti-Jewish massacre. And it's going to evoke in you a defensive, aggressive, totally non-compassionate response. That's what's going to happen. And that's what's happened. Now, those of you that are interested, there's a film that was shown, it's being shown all over the world now. It was made about a year ago. It's called Israelism. Israelism. It's about how North American Jewish kids are acculturated and propagandized into identifying with Israel. You can see it online now. You might have to pay some money, but you can see it online. It'll explain to you the very pervasive propaganda system by which Jewish kids are educated on this continent, including here in Canada. When I go to the Jewish Community Center, Israeli flags. So that Jewishness is equated with Israel. So the fact that there were Jews all along who criticized and opposed Zionism, and many more of them do now, that's not mentioned. So it's very simple to understand. Traumatized people, they come from fear and aggression, and in the absence of historical knowledge, which has been denied to them, they don't know what's going on. And mostly they don't want to know because they don't want to look. I mean, if you want to look on the internet, I could give you 100 sources of Israelis talking about reality, but these people will never look at it because they don't want to have their beliefs challenged or undercut. So that's how it happens. But anybody who wants to know, oh my God, don't even look at Palestinian sources, which you could if you wanted to. Edward Said, Rashid Khalidi, others, Palestinian poets, novelists. But at least look at the Jewish ones who've uncovered the truth about what's going on. And every day, I get articles in Israeli press in English that tell the truth. It's a small minority of journalists, but it's available. People don't want to look at it. So that's how.
So I'm just going to
and by the way, you know what? Your question also, it could be more generalized, because if you look at the Indigenous communities here, and I say this not as a criticism, I say it as an observation, it's got high rates of childhood sexual abuse, as we know. And substance abuse and all kinds of stuff. Well, you might say, well, how can people that this happened to do it to their children? But you know what? That's what trauma does. It distorts you. Until you work it through, trauma distorts your functioning. Then you'll do things that happen to you, and you think it's normal. That's what we're seeing in part. That's what we're seeing over there now. Okay, sorry, I'm done with that answer now.
Thank you. We had a question among us as sort of grassroots organizers. Most of us are unionized members from various healthcare unions, but we often find we're faced with, our organizations are reluctant to take any real action on this or a stance on this out of the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic, and to speak out, on behalf of Palestinian people, or to lobby for Canada to be doing more. So do you have any strategies or advice for those of us that are grassroots organizers to have our organizations, change their thoughts on this?
I don't. I'm not an organizer, which is a good thing, because if I was, nothing would ever get organized with my ADD, So I don't. All I can tell you, if I can ever be of support to any of you, just reach out and I'll do it, But I don't know what to say about organizational activity.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm just going to invite Hannah, who's one of our organizers, to just speak just very briefly, just to give you a second to grab a drink if you need, or just to have a break for a moment, as we have another event that's scheduled for May. And so Hannah's just going to speak briefly about that. Hannah, you're
Hello. Yes, sorry, it took me a little by surprise. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hannah Embry. I am speaking with you from the traditional territories of the Dene and Denisah people in northern BC, also known as Treaty 8 territory. I just wanted to say, Gabor, it has been an honor to share the heaviness of this time with you. I really appreciate the time you've taken to come and speak with us. And to be a speaker on behalf of our group. You are our inaugural speaker, and I'm here to talk to everyone about our next webinar that will be happening on May 7th. We will be putting a link in the chat. We have an Médecins Sans Frontières nurse, Amy Lee Potter, will be attending on that day. Amy Lee is a seasoned Canadian healthcare professional. She brings over 2 decades of expertise in trauma and global health. She's worked extensively with Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, in both Africa and the Middle East. We would love for you to join us on May 7th as she shares insights from her recent assignment in Gaza and to hear about the patient's stories behind the term collateral damage. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So now we're just going to move into, I think, some more of the questions that we had from our audience. So this question is from Janice. She said she's an RN working in hospice, and she truly believes that if individuals were more aware of the history and occupation of Palestine for the last 7 decades, that they may think twice and believe that this is a genocide. And no one is disputing the horrific atrocities on October the 7th, but what the IDF is doing is truly overkill. This is the words of the audience member. And now settlers are talking about the valuable land near the ocean. And so kind of the question here is what sort of can be done about Israeli plans to settle on oceanfront property within Gaza, and just the mindset there.
First of all, let's keep in mind that it's not just Gaza that we're talking about here. We're talking about also the West Bank. And what's going on there is that every day more and more land is being taken away from the Palestinians. Just this week, the Israeli government announced its largest land grab in decades, since 1993, in the West Bank. Let me tell you a story. Israeli said, by the way, as a Jew, I could fly to Tel Aviv tomorrow. Today is Wednesday, or tomorrow's Thursday. By Friday, I could ask for citizenship. And by Monday, I could be living in a settlement in the West Bank with Israeli government subsidy, where I have the right to have 4 or 5 times as much water annually as the Palestinians. The Palestinians don't have the right to dig wells on their own lands without a permission, which is never granted. There was a case a few months ago where Israeli settlers who are given free rein to lord it over the Palestinians went into a Palestinian village and destroyed a bunch of houses. Nobody stopped them. When the Palestinians returned to their land, to their homes, they were met by a representative of the Israeli occupation who said to them, oh, sorry. Just 1 second, please. Okay. Representative of the Israeli occupation who said, you can come back, but you can't build. You can't even fix your homes. You can't replace 1 brick. And the roof of your house that has been broken and a winter rain is falling into your living room, you can't put a tarp on it. Because to put a tarp on your home would be construction without a license. And you're not allowed to build without a license. So if you build without a license, if you put a tarp on your living room that's been caved in by settlers, we're going to come and bulldoze your home. People, this is going on every day. It's unbelievable. Needless to say, you'll never read a word about it in the Canadian press or hear about it on the CBC. So as long as Israel has got the support of the West, particularly the US and its lackeys in Ottawa and elsewhere, it's going to continue to do it. So there's an interview with a Jewish woman from New York. You can watch it on YouTube, who says, of course, we've already got the town, we're looking for some beautiful waterfront property in Gaza. And we already have the towns named. We're ready to go at a drop of a hat. So I'm afraid that as long as there's international, I should say not international, because most of the world is just sickened by it. But as long as the global north is behind Israel militarily and economically, it's going to continue. And members of the Israeli government are already talking about how we should settle Gaza again. So when you say, what can we do? Political action. Just not being quiet about this. I mean, the Canadian Parliament did pass a very weak and mealy-mouthed little resolution last week. But at least they did. That was their response to the disgust in this country about what Israel is doing. It needs to be loud and clear, and the answer to that question is a political one. Until that happens, it's going to continue, and it's just going to get worse.
This is a paraphrase of a question that's been asked from one of our audience members, Christopher Powell. So you did mention that when somebody has trauma, their compassion and insight sort of shuts down.
Well, unless they work through the trauma.
Right. And so our question here is, do you have advice for speaking with somebody who has inherited or vicarious trauma, who is triggered into sort of a post-traumatic fight or flight response? So is it possible to open up this therapeutic window with somebody who has a traumatic response, or is it better to just disengage with that individual?
On this issue? You
Yes.
mean, yeah. Well, you can listen to them and say, I really hear what you're saying. You're afraid that this is happening to your people, and you think that the only response is this military one. Are you at all? I get it, and I get the history that makes you feel that way. Are you at all open to a different point of view? Are you open to a different point of view that actually would say that what you're doing or what you're supporting endangers your people? Do you know something? There was a study in the US that showed that anti-Semitism goes up after Israeli military actions. It was a report in the New York Times just a few days ago. So you can ask, you can listen, and you can replay what you heard. Yeah, here's what I hear you saying. Here's what I understand you to believe. Are you open? If they say no, don't even try. There's no point. All you're going to get is resistance. And I would say the best thing you can say then, it's totally up to, I can't tell you what to do. But it's a very fair thing to say to people. Okay, on this issue, you got to know, I totally see it differently. We should never talk about it again. Or if that's what you believe, if you really think that it's okay to kill thousands of children, I don't want to talk to you. I'm not blaming you. You got your beliefs, but I don't want to be engaged with you. The more people get that message, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So I personally, I don't talk to people like that unless they want to hear, unless they're open to a different point of view. So, but whatever you do, make your position clear and say, okay, look, I understand that's what you believe. I can't engage with you because I see the world so differently. They should know that. They should not live in this cocoon of thinking that, oh, it's all okay. Everybody thinks it's okay. What conclusion they draw from that? Or you must be another anti-Semite. That's their problem, not yours.
So we have another question here from an audience member who said, how do you approach conversations generationally between maybe a young person's generation now and folks that are older? There seems to be a sharp distinction between some generations on this issue. And
well, there is,
yeah, yeah.
And that generational divide is very apparent in the Jewish community. So if you look at the polls, many more young Jews now are totally opposed to what Israel is doing than their parents. It's creating a lot of discomfort in a lot of families. The first time I spoke out about this issue was in 1967. I was 23. My father kicked me out of the house. No, he came around. But some parents don't come around. I think the best thing you can do is take care of yourself and don't come from a position of self-righteous anger, of judgment of the other person. They can't help believing what they believe. They really can't. Whether the Jews or non-Jews, the older generation is conditioned by the war and the Holocaust. They have a certain point of view. And for a long time, Israel was idealized in the Western mind as kind of this progressive liberal democracy in the Middle East as the answer to the, it's very interesting, of course. All these countries that created Israel in the United Nations, Canada, the US, what did they do with the Jews that wanted to come here? They said no. There was a book decades ago written, None is Too Many, about Canada's refusal to allow Jews to immigrate here. Meanwhile, Canada said, let these people go to Israel. So they tried to solve their own anti-Semitic problem at the expense of the Palestinians. As a result, Canada has always waged a lot of propaganda on behalf of Israel. And people are taken in by it, Jews or non-Jews. So you have to just grant them that and say, okay, look, I get it. This is what you're saying. But don't try and push it. Don't force it. Don't try to convince anybody who doesn't want to hear. Just have to accept that that's how it is. And if you can speak gently, and if that opens some minds, which sometimes it does, that's good. If it doesn't, don't try to do the impossible. And just accept the sadness of that chasm, ideological chasm between one generation and the next.
Okay, so one of I think we probably have time for maybe one more question. We have a question here about, well, there's actually been a couple questions about it, but the sense that people are feeling right now is being hopeless, wanting to avoid this reality, being numb or dehumanized kind of to it all. And so how do you overcome apathy?
Well, what is the source of that apathy? It's a sense of, it's beyond me. There's nothing I can do. It's too big. Okay. And you know what? It's true. It's bigger than any of us. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us put together. In the short term. But there's not only the short term, there's also the long term. Now, someone I've been quoting a lot these days is a Jewish rabbi who lived 2,200 years ago, about 100 years before Jesus. And he was talking about the task of healing the world, which in Hebrew is called tikkun olam. And he said, the task is not yours to finish, but neither are you free not to take part in it. And if not now, Yeah, no, that's what he said. Yeah, the task is not yours to finish, but neither are you free not to take part in it. So there's a long-term project here. When you look at all the truth speakers in history, how successful have they been? If you look at the Buddha and his compassion, how's that going, people? If you look at Jesus and his divine love and forgiveness and non-judgment and turn the other cheek and peace and do unto others, how's that one going? But where would the world be without those truths being articulated? And this won't last forever. It's not sustainable. The Israelis don't know it, they don't want to know it, but they're digging their own graves. And the people that are supporting them or cheering them on. I won't go to the historical analysis as to why it's not sustainable, but it isn't. And the question you have to face is, even if when I speak out or whatever I do, it has a minimal effect at the present, will it contribute to more justice in the world, to the light of truth in the world, to the force of authenticity in the world? And if it will, why would you not want to take part in that? So I think the antidote to apathy is looking at human progress and the contribution that you can make and how much poorer the world would be if you didn't. That's my response to apathy. And don't force yourself. You know, if you're not up to it, don't do it. Okay?
Hi, folks. Thank you, Gabor. This is Ben again. So we're going to pass it over to Fraser, just to briefly talk about what we nurses in our group are doing or trying to do to take action and act in solidarity. So Fraser, I'll pass it to you. And after Fraser talks briefly on this, we're going to pass it back to Samud just to present a handmade gift before we close. So Fraser, I'll pass to you.
Yeah, thanks. My name's Fraser. My pronouns are he, they, and I'm joining from the sovereign Hakulti of the Hawaiian First Nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And I'm a BCNU member of the Pacific Rim region. So I just wanted to share a little bit about our work as the BC Nurses United for Social Justice. So our union, the BCNU, has a member convention. This year it's in May, and we are bringing 2 different resolutions for debate at the BCNU. So resolutions, for those who aren't familiar, is a motion that's debated at the union convention. And if it gets passed, it can give direction to the council of the BCNU to guide policy or to instruct them to take a specific action. And usually resolutions have kind of a specific measurable request. So we are bringing 2. The first one is around solidarity with the people of Gaza. So this resolution came from, our ongoing kind of shock and horror at what's happening in Gaza and our concern with the silence from the BCNU. And as Gabor mentioned, BCNU seems to be and is a very conservative institution, especially compared to other unions across the province and around the world. So that this resolution specifically kind of requests that the BCNU will release a statement condemning the siege on Gaza and including specifically the targeting of healthcare workers and health infrastructure. As we've seen, more than 800 attacks have been documented on healthcare in Gaza and the West Bank since October of 2023. And we are requesting that the BCNU released a statement condemning this, calling for unimpeded humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza. And we're also requesting that the union make a donation as well to humanitarian aid. The cost is estimated to only be around 30 cents per BCNU member, so really accessible resolution and action to take. The second resolution is around investigating our pension and our pension investments, specifically in weapons companies and manufacturers. So this resolution kind of came from information we received from the BC Teachers Federation, their Divest Now group, which I learned that the municipal pension plan, which is the pension for the majority of BCNU members, is invested in a portfolio that's managed by this big investment corporation. And that corporation invests in companies including Raytheon and Elbit Systems, which are weapons companies that have manufactured weapon components and technologies that Israel has used in Gaza over the last 6 months. So this resolution is specifically to kind of call on the BCNU to investigate our pension investments in weapons companies and report back to the membership at a public forum. So for those who are joining us today and are members of the BC Nurses Union, we really need your support with these resolutions because these are grassroots member-driven resolutions. So we'll be sharing the QR codes on your screen here. And there's links that have been shared in the chat that will take you to a Google document where you can enter your name, your information to support these resolutions. So I really encourage you to take a minute now. If you are a member of the BCNU and you do want to support change in the BCNU and want to support these resolutions specifically, to please visit these QR codes, visit the links in the chat there, and sign your name in support. And if you do want to get more involved in this, please reach out to us after this webinar for some more information or to connect with us. We're really hoping that together we can kind of shift the position of the union from one of complacency and complicity to one where we support the liberation of Palestine. And yeah, now I believe I'm going to hand it over to, or I'll just, yeah, folks take a minute to please visit those links. And then we're going to have a closing.
Okay, I guess I'm up. You guys left the sweetest till the last. Okay, I'm gonna try not to be emotional. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This means in Arabic, may peace and mercy and blessings of Allah be upon you. I respectfully acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional stolen territories of indigenous people. My name is Sumud Nobani. Sumud means steadfast in Arabic. I am Palestinian. I was born in wartime. I am the daughter of a strong and a steadfast woman who was forced to leave her home in 1948. My mother told me stories about the sorrowful hardship she had to endure from the tender age of 9. Stories that will always remain in my heart and which I am now passing on to my daughters and the world. For a long time, I had felt that I was alone, immersed in a private sorrow. But by the grace of Allah, I have found myself surrounded by many good people, siblings in the struggle of justice, along with wonderful figures like you, Dr. Maté. You are someone who uses his compassion, knowledge, and voice to educate others. And in doing so, you help alleviate the burden of sorrow for so many of us. Because of you, all of you here, and here's the rainfall, it's coming. Because of all of you, I have not felt alone during the difficult, heartbreaking days of our people who are going through those difficult times in Gaza, the occupied West Bank, and occupied Jerusalem. As an expression of deep gratitude and appreciation for who you are, Dr. Maté, and the work you do, we have created this heartfelt piece cross stitch. Thank you, if I may, Habibi. For those who don't speak Arabic, Habibi means my darling. We are, after all, loving people. Don't listen to propaganda. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so if you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us, you've got about 5 minutes left, but that's okay if you don't as well. We just really, our sincerest gratitude for your time today and speaking with all of us from across the province. And actually, we did have folks attend from other provinces as well. So thank you again.
Well, look, I speak out on this subject for a number of reasons. One of them was just mentioned, which is that I don't want the Palestinians to feel alone. We all know, I think we all know individually at least, what it's like to have pain and sorrow and to feel alone with it. And for the most part, the world since 1947 has abandoned the Palestinians. And what's been going on ever since is a result of that abandonment. So if I can contribute to people not feeling so alone, to Sumud not feeling alone, then I'm very happy about that. So that's one reason. Another reason I already mentioned is so that those of you who are not Jewish, but who have strong feelings and principles and values around this issue, that you're not intimidated by this calumny of being anti-Semite. But one reason I speak out is simply personal. I just can't not. It's that simple. There's a quote on my cell phone from Albert Einstein that I really love that I'll just find for you. I have lots of quotes on my cell phone. But this one says, he said, the right to search for truth, this is Albert Einstein, who, by the way, supported Zionism and then became very critical of it. And he warned in 1948 that it's heading in a fascist direction. He said this in 1948 in a letter to the New York Times. But he said, Einstein said, the right to search for truth implies also a duty. One must not conceal any part of what one has recognized to be true. Now, that doesn't make you right all the time, but if you recognize something to be true, and if you're sure of it in your heart, and if you've done the work, you have the duty to speak about it. And so those are three of the reasons, and I hope that those reasons are equally persuasive to you as well. And above all, it's just anybody's got a heart and a sense of justice. How can you help but do something, say something, however minimal, however ineffective, however seemingly futile? How can you not? So thank you all for listening, and I'm very grateful for your work, and which I know goes way beyond the issue of Palestine. The final thing I'll say is, I think it's a really strategically important dynamic to relate Canada's internal colonial history with what's going on over there. And we need to support our Indigenous people here, because it's far from over, as you know. Surely your work tells you that. And it's the same dynamic and it's the same system. So when we're working for freedom there, we're working for freedom here. And when we're working for freedom here, we're working for freedom there. And you know that statement, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Don't be afraid of it. It doesn't mean they're going to kill all the Jews. It means free for everybody, Jew and Palestinian. And by the way, I wish the same thing from Canada. I wish that from sea to shining sea, Canada should be free. And it isn't. Not when you look at all the inequalities and injustices. So it's the same struggle. That's it. Thank you very much. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Gabor. Just a few thank yous here to close this up as we're approaching 8:30. Yeah, Samud, thank you. Very generous use of the word we when describing who made that cross stitch. So thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank my former UBC nursing instructor, Elder Dr. Roberta Price, for opening our event in a good way. Thank you to our guest, Gabor, who generously gave his time to share his insights on Gaza during this critical global moment. Thank you for the folks who donated to make this event possible, and a big thank you to all our attendees, especially our BC Nurses Union colleagues, staff, leadership who attended. We really appreciate it. And to those nurses who took action tonight or before this event and endorsed our resolutions. So we hope to see you folks at our May 7th webinar with MSF for Doctors Without Borders nurse Emilia Potter. Hi, Emilia. Now you're here, who just recently returned from Gaza. And we'll be sending out an invite to all those who attended tonight. So thank you again. We hope to catch you soon, and good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.